I had a professor, he taught a class called British Women Crime Writers. And this had everything I loved. I loved the way British people talked. I liked women writers. I found them less macho than a lot of the white male writers I had read. And then crime writing, so mysteries. And at the end of the semester, we wrote a short story, a mystery. And he gave me an A plus, and he wrote something that I will never forget. He wrote, "You have a storytelling ability you should zealously cultivate." And that was all I needed. And even when I was practicing as an accountant, I kept that as my little secret, that this man who had read a lot and had taught for decades was moved by my writing, and that meant so much to me.
Welcome to Shop Talk with Writers, the podcast where we are curious about the stories behind the books. I'm Elena Lappin, and this is our end-of-year special episode, and my very special guest today is Gary Gulman. Gary is a much-loved American stand-up comedian, but on this podcast he tells us about his brilliant, funny, and very moving memoir, Misfit, Growing Up Awkward in the 80s. Enjoy.
This is Gary Gulman, and I'm reading from my book, Misfit, Growing Up Awkward in the 80s. I still hated school except for a few writing projects. Those I loved. Early in the year, I wrote and gave an oral report on the whale. Do I ever love the whale? When I found out that the whale belonged to the same vertebrate class as humans, the mammals, I was overjoyed. Proud in a similar way to when I found out Fonzie from ABC's Happy Days was Jewish. I went deep, covering several whale species and delivering a lengthy condemnation of brutal international whaling policies. Soon thereafter, about a week before Thanksgiving, I wrote what I believed to be a hilarious short story about an acerbic turkey and the farmer who was going to kill him. The turkey was insulting to the farmer. I wanted the turkey to come off like a streetwise scamp. I had her use words like gonna, ain't, loser, putz, and hick. Mrs. Turner was outraged by my looseness with grammar and vocabulary. She covered the paper in red ink. It stung. I thought she was going to marvel at my facility with humor. She recoiled. In December, I had a chance for redemption. Mrs. Turner gave us a project where we were tasked with creating a real holiday book. We were to write a book, and then she would teach us how to make real covers using cardboard and fabric. We would then sew the pages together and glue them into the cover. Having been chastised for my disregard for academic conventions at Thanksgiving, I was meticulous with my Christmas effort. Following in the illustrious tradition of Jewish contributions to the Christmas canon, White Christmas, Santa Baby, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, I wrote and illustrated an 8-page opus titled The Lonely Tree. Writing the book gave me a stage I hadn't had before, a forum to express an ineffable sense of melancholy and fatalism that I had never been able to explain. It wasn't that I knew anything was wrong. I just felt that if you were unpopular, ugly, sensitive, on free lunch, soft, and emotional, you were destined to be sad and nervous your whole life. How could you not be? How could you feel good or optimistic unless you were rich or beautiful or popular at school? You had to hold out for a miracle. In my book, I told the story of a fir tree who was overlooked, underestimated, held back, but then triumphed. I knew no one in that class could write a better story about Christmas. As a Jew, I was an enthusiast and an expert on Christmas with a reverence and enthusiasm only an outsider could summon. The book opened with a simple sentence. There once was a tree that no one liked. The tree in question was being teased and bullied by other trees and forest creatures. He was so sad and lonely that he cried all day long. The tears gave him the nourishment to grow big and strong and beautiful and popular. So striking was this tree that a lumberjack cut it down and brought it to New York City to be the official Rockefeller Center Christmas tree. People came from far and wide to adore him. I built suspense by having him dry out and nearly catch fire. Ultimately, the tree survived and Christmas was saved. The reception for the book was extraordinary, just what I had hoped. Even stern Mrs. Turner liked it. My father was so impressed that he brought it to a publisher who politely praised it, but explained that his company made textbooks. No one, including the publisher, asked my father, mother, and teacher how they could all be so obtuse about a work that, despite its remarkable artistry and execution, was clearly a cry for help.
Gary Gulman, thank you so much for joining us on Shop Talk with Writers and for reading from your extraordinary memoir, Misfit.
Thank you.
Can I just show you what I have here? So I have your memoir. By the way, this is only audio. We're not recording video.
Right. Yeah.
So I have your memoir, Misfit. I also have this book.
Oh, yes. That was the first book I ever
Monster
read, The Monster at the End of This Book by Grover.
And I also have Frankenstein by Mary Shelley.
Oh, wow.
Because you talked about and you showed all these books at your show recently in London. I went to see you at the Soho Theatre. Was it in October, about a month ago or more?
Yes. Yeah, it was October. I think October 6th through the 11th. And I had the time of my life. I'm now in love with London.
I have to say that was an incredible treat. So just to kind of explain my history with you, I have a very loving relationship with my algorithms. They seem to always know what I like.
Oh, wow. And yeah, same.
Yeah. For some reason, at some point, my algorithms, Facebook, everywhere, started kind of showing me Gary Gulman. And I didn't know who Gary Gulman was. So the first thing I saw by Gary Gulman was your talk about the abbreviations.
Oh, how the states in America got their abbreviations.
The documentary about how they got together to abbreviate. Yes. And I thought, wow, I'd never seen anyone so so earnest and so funny and so charming in the delivery. And then, of course, I saw so much of you in little clips and, these reels. And then, of course, I saw your shows, but I never imagined that I would get an email in my inbox saying Gary Gulman at the Soho Theatre.
Wow.
So I immediately booked 2 tickets. So I went with a friend and we sat in second row. And so we weren't lucky enough to have our hands shaken by you because you shook the hands of everyone in the front row.
Right. But I did go to the bar afterwards to meet anybody who wanted to say hello.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
We didn't know that.
Yeah, that would be the consolation.
Oh, that would have been great. So we didn't say hello, but I thought, I have this podcast. I could actually speak to you about so many things and particularly because you wrote the memoir, this book. And so we will. But let's begin with The Monster at the End of This Book, which is a book about Grover, or Groverle, as you called him.
Yes.
You actually brought with you to the performance the original book that you had as a child, didn't you?
Yes.
Is that the actual one?
No. The actual one disappeared when my mom moved from our house, and I was never able to find it. But that is, I've bought several copies over the years for friends, and now because I talk about it, people give it to me as a gift. So that was probably either one that the props people bought for my New York City run, or one that had been given to me as a gift.
And what about the Christmas tree book? Was that the original?
That is the original. That's a museum
item.
Yes.
And you're not even worried about losing it?
I'm not afraid of losing my book from when I was 7 years old, because I know so many great writers lost so many manuscripts to the Nazis that I say worse things have happened.
Okay.
So because as you know, as a writer, we lose notebooks and we lose files and we beat ourselves up, and it's not worth it. It's interesting because I hadn't I did not consult my book when I wrote the one person show that was based on the book. And so I told the same stories, but in some of the same stories, but in different words and in a more interesting, funny way for the stage. Then it's a different type of writing. So I think that's also a it's a great lesson about the power of a new draft, a fresh draft, and getting some distance from the work you've done.
You know what's really funny? We're recording this on Riverside. Shout out to Riverside. But we're talking to each other as if we were doing a long distance phone call in the 80s, like shouting.
Yes.
So it's just like, I want to make sure you can hear me. It's so weird.
Yeah.
It's really funny.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's funny.
Anyway, Gary, Misfit,
Yes.
your memoir. I absolutely loved it. And
Oh, thank
I
you.
would love to talk to you about what happens between, because there was a lot of that material in the show.
Yeah.
What's the process, as it's called, between do you write the memoir? Do you extract from it for your stand up? Or is it the other way around? Is it completely separate?
It was, I mean, it's interesting because, like I said, I did not consult the book when I was writing what I wanted the stand up show to be, but I knew the stories and I knew, and it's interesting what I included and what I left out or what I added. And so I hadn't read anything from the book in a couple of
No.
years, and I thought, I mean, it's a great feeling when you read something and you think it's better than you had remembered it, or at least that it's not that you're not cringing while reading it. So I think that's a good sign. But um, I think I just when you write for a book, I think there's this idea that I'm trying to make a reader laugh, and so there are styles and strategies to do that. And then as you do it for a stand-up audience, you're trying to make an audience laugh by what you're saying out loud. And so there's an adjustment, and you have so many more tools. You have your body language, and you have your voice, and changing voice and modulation. So it's a much more difficult challenge, I think, to get laughs from the page as opposed to stand up. And also with stand up, the one positive with the book in terms of, I think the audience is not expecting to laugh every few seconds,
Mm.
whereas an audience at a comedy show is looking for more frequent laughter. So I guess the process was to forget what I had actually written, except for the story that I was trying to tell. And so you tell a story enough, and you remember certain parts, and you repeat certain parts, and it's a, sort of the oral tradition where things you lean into things, and you get better at telling it, and you understand where the audience is laughing. So it would be interesting to I just know that I was offered the chance to just read from my book at some of my appearances, and I thought, no, I think people's expectations are different for a comedian, and so I think it was a good choice to convert or I guess adapt the Misfit book to a stand-up show, and then later a one-person show.
But your stand-up comedy, as opposed to many other stand-up comedians, has that quality. I mean, you gave it yourself the title grandiloquent, which means
Yeah.
extremely well spoken with many big words, and you do that, and you never lose yourself in that flow of big words and wonderful expressions, and it just kind of sounds written. And that's why I
Yeah.
was wondering if, to what extent is your writing really pretty much the same, except in the book it's to be read, and in the show it's to be performed and spoken to two
Right.
people.
I mean, there's a similar aim, I guess, which
Yeah.
is, and this is modern stand up, where you want it to seem conversational. You do not want to sound too written. However, part of my um, angle
Mm.
is that I I wanted to sound like somebody wrote it.
Yeah.
Like that there are two things going on here. I don't know whether I did it consciously or subconsciously, but I've always loved to hear smart people talk. I always thought it made me smarter to listen to smart people talk. So I'm a good listener. And then there was this thing where I wanted, and I do not know why, but I wanted I guess because I loved writing so much and the way words appear on a page, and I love reading so much, that I had heard this said about a friend of mine named Brian Kiley, that his jokes were very effective even if you just read them. And and I thought, wow, that's a great compliment and also an interesting aim. And and I guess as you become better at comedy, you look for things to challenge yourself. And so that was one of the things to
Mm.
try and make my words, my jokes hold up in writing. And that lends itself nicely to actually writing a humorous book. But I guess the process, and you know this as a writer as well, is that you need to make it seem conversational, that it wasn't written, and yet you spend so much time writing to make it. It's the irony of it. You have to write so much to make it sound unwritten. You have to cross things out and adjust things. And I guess what I've done is try to make it sound like it was not written, but said by a person much smarter than me.
Both your performance and the book have a couple of things in common, important things. One of them is that you know how to give voices to your various characters in the most natural, convincing, real way. So, reading your book and listening to your comedy, one can hear your mother, your father, various
My
friends,
therapist. Yeah,
a
my therapist
therapist,
also I do an impression of, yeah.
teacher, but not as impressions. I mean, maybe in the show it's impressions, but in the book it's a literary version of the people you are writing about, the people you knew. They come across as both real but also somewhat fictionalized. Speaking of fictionalized, I have to say, because you give phone numbers behind the name
Yeah.
after the names of various
Yeah.
characters. I thought, are these the real numbers? And then I noticed
Yeah.
that you actually say you changed one digit
Yeah, I
in
changed
each
one
number.
digit.
And I thought that was
Yeah,
hilarious because
for legal reasons. Because I still remember all those phone numbers.
I remember phone numbers of my friends, and I'm older than you, and I remember the
Okay.
phone numbers of my friends. We're talking 1950s, 1960s
Wow.
Czechoslovakia.
Wow.
And I can tell you, my best friend in year one was, her number was 27 16 68. Maybe it still is because she moved back to her dead mother's house now, so
Oh,
she could,
wow.
so when you put those numbers in the book, in the memoir, I thought that's hilarious, but are they real? So by changing
Yeah.
one digit, you did something sort of similar to how we slightly change a character. They are
Sure.
fully recognizable, but yet in a way it is your version of them. Would you agree with that?
Oh yes, 100%. And a couple of them I had to change the physical descriptions for legal reasons
Yeah.
because they were still alive.
Yeah.
And in America, I don't know if it's the same in the UK, but in America, unless somebody's a public figure, you can't really disparage them. Um, and so it opens the publisher up to legal battles. So I did adjust, and I mean I think certain caricature characters can become caricature, but
Mm.
I wanted them to be human.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the themes is just that all these people were a mixed bag. They had some wonderful qualities, but they also were overwhelmed by life, and could be downright cruel. But for the most part, there was in my home there was love and affection.
Gary, you really, really cared about your teachers.
Oh
Um,
my word,
you
yes.
took them so seriously as
Yeah,
people, as
yeah,
you had this need to really know them and for them to see you as who you were, and you were either very deeply hurt by them or very deeply affectionate towards them. That's really interesting.
yeah. I think that because my my father left the house, I gravitated to father figures. So whenever there was a man in my life, a coach, or at one point I had a male teacher, I just really became attached to them. And I also, like I said, I was a really good listener. So if you were saying something really smart, I paid attention
Mhm.
growing up, and so I was, I was, I was not always getting excellent grades in high school because of my depression. I would fall apart from time to time, but the teachers that I was able to relate to and listen to, I still think about my 11th grade English teacher, Mr. Story, who had memorized so many great sentences from American literature and Hawthorne and Thoreau and Emerson and Fitzgerald and Hemingway. And it was such a gift. I mean, it was limited to white men, but it was such a gift. Although I think we also read some Shirley Jackson and maybe Alice Munro, but the point was is that he was clearly passionate about these words, and I was passionate about words, and looked to books for gleaning as much philosophy and how to live from them as possible. And some white men had better ways about coping with life than others. I find Hemingway sort of a
Mm.
tragic figure
Yeah.
as an adult in terms of how he lived his life. It's very sad to me, but some of the other ones were the transcendentalists and the existentialists. It was very interesting. I guess maybe the impact the transcendentalist had on the existentialists, and what I was able to gather from that. So my teachers were very important to me, and I had a healthy respect and admiration, and in some cases they became people that I have high school teachers that I remain in touch with, and
Mm.
I mean in college I had this one. I was an accounting professor, I think this points to the impact that a single sentence said by somebody you admire can have. I had a professor. He taught a class called British Women Crime Writers, and and this had everything I loved. I loved
Mm.
the way British people talked. I liked women writers. I found them less macho than a lot of the white male writers I had read, and then crime writing, so mystery. So at the end of the semester, we wrote a short story, a mystery, and he gave me an A plus, which I'd never gotten an A plus in anything since second grade. He gave me an A plus, and he wrote something that I will never forget. He wrote, "You have a storytelling ability you should zealously cultivate," and and that was all I needed. And even when I was practicing as an accountant, I kept that as my little secret, that this man who had read a lot and had taught for decades was moved by my writing, and that meant so much to me.
I feel that this novel is actually written. I mean, it's not novel. I just said novel. I meant memoir is written like a novel almost. It reads like a novel. And I'll say something about that in a second. But first, I just need to ask, was your English teacher's real name Mr. Story?
Yes, isn't that incredible?
No, it's not
That's called, I
incredible.
think,
Gary, I had I,
nominative.
I had a gynecologist named Dr. Chronic. I think that's even better.
That's really good. Oh my word. Wow.
But that was
But
his real
there's a
name.
yeah, there's a term for that, nominative determinism.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
well,
So he was born to be.
I didn't even know.
Yeah,
But
I love it.
I felt that this memoir is it has that kind of drive, the narrative drive of a story, but also the real vulnerability, which, by the way, is another thing that it shares with your performance. It has real freedom of opening up anything that needs to be opened up, and only great literature does that. So you've done
Oh,
that.
wow.
You've done that here, and what's very interesting also is the structure of it, because it veers between two levels really in time. One is the year 2017, when
Yeah.
you had a breakdown and you moved back to your mother's house. And
Yes.
between those moments, you write about important parts of your life growing up in that very same house.
Yeah.
So, how did that structure sort of come to you? Was it a very natural, instant idea, or did you have to figure it out?
It was not an instant idea, but once my editor wanted something to connect the stories, and it wasn't enough that it was grade by grade. It
Mm,
had to answer the question. I think we talked about we need to answer the question, why bring this up now?
mm,
And the answer so clearly was, well, I I just intersected with this world once again, but at nearly 50 years old, at I guess 47 years old, I had moved back to the house that all these things from my childhood happened in. And in some cases, the same people were living in the same homes. They were just adults who had bought their mom's home, which is a very common thing amongst Generation X, to only be able to afford the house that your mom lived in.
mm,
So that became natural, but it wasn't something that I went into the project with as the guidepost. But once it was, it really helped to formulate the chapters. And I mean, and to answer, I think you wanted to know the aspects of the novel, or how it
mm,
seems like a novel. I think probably because most of my reading is novels. I do read a lot of nonfiction, but my favorite type of reading is a novel. And also I love to read nonfiction that reads like a
mm.
novel.
Well,
I'm um uh there's a book called, is it called Tell No One, about the troubles in Ireland?
mm,
Yeah, Patrick Radden Keefe, and he's great at writing like it's a novel. And I guess the thing is, and it's just a style that I developed with my editor, and but also all the books that I read about writing a memoir, a book by Mary Carr, a book by Anne Lamott, and it it was important to me that you be able to picture these things, and I wanted to make it evocative the way my favorite novels are. So
mm,
so I wanted it to trigger. The great thing with a novel is when you feel like this is describing something you've lived through in poetic terms. So I wanted to evoke certain sensory details, smells and sounds, and also make it a little bit immersive, which I think a great novel is great at doing. And then also, and this is one of my favorite tips that writers have given over the years, is to write what you like to read.
mm,
And there are certain things that irritate me a little bit when I read, such as when they go on and on about what somebody was wearing. And in an article about, usually in the New Yorker, they'll tell what the person was wearing down to their socks. And I think, well, that doesn't I don't want to I'm going to skim over that because I'm not interested in what they were. I don't want to buy anything now. So I guess the the thing was, is that, so you got more of what it, in my book, you get more of what it smelled like, and a description. This was from John McPhee. He said, don't borrow vividness, which is to say, don't say somebody looks like Tom Cruise. Tell us what that person looked like. Otherwise, a person going to be picturing Tom Cruise, and they're not picturing a real human. Well, they're picturing one specific human being, but they're not picturing that person. So that was another thing. I mean, the great thing about writing a lot is that it makes you want to read a lot, and it makes your reading better. And I can't think of a better way to spend my days than to rotate between reading and writing. I will say that it is, to anyone who wants to write a book, it requires a lot of discipline, and then it becomes something that you automatically do, and you find it much easier to write today than to skip today's writing, and that's not overnight. And I found that for the first few days, weeks, I couldn't write more than a couple hours a day without you have to build up endurance, and you have to maintain the endurance by keeping writing. But the main thing I will say is that it's a lot of writers go out of their way to talk about how unpleasant it is,
Mm,
and it's not 100% unpleasant, and you don't have to only write. You can also read, and you can go for walks, and you can play with your pets or family members, and see movies. It's not there are some people who only write, and they write 14 hours a day, and they get up and write, and they go to sleep writing, and that's one way to do it. But I don't that doesn't seem pleasant to me. My experience was that it was a pleasant experience. And also, every day I would have this challenge that on some days was fruitful, and on other days I would say maybe tomorrow will be better. And I think that's a fun way to live.
Was there anything that seemed particularly difficult to write about? For example, your parents, was that hard?
Um, it was hard to write about the things that weren't that funny.
Ah,
I I
well,
I'm
speaking of
Yeah.
that, there is a sentence in your book which I found was like a key sentence to the whole book. And it's on page 87, and you say, they laughed after something you said. They laughed. I wasn't joking.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because some of the worst laughs I've ever gotten were when I was not joking, and they were hearty laughs. Like, for years, whenever I told somebody I wanted to be a comedian, I would get derisive laughter. But I think, yeah, the most difficult things for a comedian to write are the ones that they can't find a punchline to.
Mm,
And that became sort of the one of the one of the hypotheses or theses of my one person show, which is, what does it feel like to not be funny, and why are you so averse to speaking without punchlines, and
mm,
where does that come from? And so I think the one person show tells it in a much tighter span. And but the book, I also think, it was I had to read certain chapters long after I had written them, and my test was whether I could still find them um pleasant. And
mm.
for the most part, I would say they were. So yeah, I'm glad. I'm I'm glad about the way I wrote the book.
I find you should be glad because it's really wonderful. I find that the way you write about your mother is actually not strongly sort of indicative of needing a punchline, but you just put her there. And you mentioned Philip Roth at some point later
Yeah.
on in the book in relation to male Jewish adolescents. But actually,
Yeah.
what I found really interesting, well, you know, the first sentence in Portnoy's complaint, I felt that that
Yes.
could be, it's like the heart of your book in another way. So that first sentence, I'm going to quote it, is, she was so deeply embedded in my consciousness that for the first years of school, I seemed to have believed that each of my teachers was my mother in disguise.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. I mean, I've read that book 3 times, and it's interesting because everybody uh, gravitates toward the final sentence of the book, which is the punchline to this 300-page joke. But I remember the first time I read it. I mean, that book is eerie in how much it overlaps with my mindset, and just the idea and and that has not changed. I can hear my mother's voice under so many circumstances, how happy she'd be about something or how disappointed she'd be in something that's going on in my life. And she's since passed since I wrote the book, but it was it I that that really resonates with me, that idea that my mother was interesting. What a brilliant way to start a book.
Yeah. And in your book, you know, that sort of um, sense of yourself as a little boy going to school at a very young age, and then each year, but really missing being at home
Yeah.
with your mother so strongly.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
existential to
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
whatever you got instead of that had to be good enough. It had to be something very strong to make up for the loss of not being with your mother at home watching TV, where she
Yeah.
wasn't even paying that
Right.
much attention to you.
Yeah.
Just hanging out with
Yeah.
her, just being with
Yeah.
her. You know, that
Yeah.
is such a beautiful way. I don't think that's something that you can kind of repeat in a performance. I think this is very much a literary take on your life, on your
Yeah.
growing up, and I think this format really gave you that space, you know, that
Yeah.
language as well that you needed for that scope. So
Yeah.
I mean, by the way, has this memoir been published in the UK?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't
No.
know that they were, yeah, because we wanted to sell them at the shows, and I think there was something preventing us
Hmm.
from selling the book there, licensing or something like that. But yeah, I find it interesting that it wouldn't be for sale in the UK, because there are
It. I.
men and women of my age there, at least, who would be interested in reading something like that. Yeah.
I hope it will be. And
Yeah.
is it at all possible that your next book might be a novel?
A novella.
Oh,
Yes, I'm working
really?
on
Oh,
a
wow.
slice of life novella that I have. I mean, I have a lot of components, and I'm working out a plot, and I um I just I I think I need a 3 week run where I'm not away on the road,
Mm,
where I can really dig in and get the momentum to keep going. So I yeah, I'm glad you asked, but that was some advice that my editor had given me. It was very complimentary. He said, if you keep writing memoirs, people will say this is a guy with really good
mm.
stories, and if you write a novella, he said, people will recognize that you're an excellent writer. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Another,
Yeah.
just one more aspect I wanted to mention. In your book, you write across several chapters, I think, about basketball. And
Yeah.
we recently had, actually, our most recent episode was with Ben Markovitz. Have you read him? So
I don't maybe.
his most recent novel is called The Rest of Our Lives. He
Okay.
is a British American author, but mostly writes novels set in America. And he was also a professional level basketball player.
Oh
So,
wow.
and he talks about sort of parallels between writing and basketball amazingly. I'll send you the link to his podcast, and
Oh, I would love
you
that.
can listen
Yeah, I
to it.
would
And
love that.
the way you write about basketball, you write about the swish.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
He talks about that, and he writes, and it's part of the novel as well. And I thought that is a very, very interesting connection. It really means
Yeah.
something, doesn't it? That basketball moment in your
Yeah,
life.
I think yeah, I think really any any skill that requires discipline, basketball, an instrument, dance, theater, I think is, even if you don't practice it as an adult, the idea that you can see yourself improve at something through effort and dedication is a great lesson to learn early. And I learned it so perfectly with basketball. And so sometimes I to this day I beat myself up for why didn't I practice even more. And I was the most dedicated person I had ever met. But there's, you'll always find, well, this person practiced even more than you. But I then say, well, you're applying this lesson to this work that is actually very practical, and so you learned a valuable lesson, and you can make these adjustments later on in life. I mean, that's such a beautiful thing about writing and stand-up comedy and other art forms, is that you improve into your last days. I read this interview, or maybe it was just a quote from an interview where a pianist had been asked, and he was, in, not exaggerating, either in his late 90s or in his hundreds, and somebody said, you practice 3 hours a day, and why is that? And he said, I'm beginning to notice some improvement. And I thought that was such a beautiful answer and so inspiring.
Yeah.
And I will say I still play basketball a lot, and I frequently give that. I tell the story and then I give that as my answer. I'm starting to notice some improvement because I play basketball regularly, and it's just I was thinking about if somebody, I had to do an interview last night also, and there were certain things that they'd given me the questions in advance, and something about what they always want to know what your secret is, and there's never a secret, but the or I guess the secret is that we are obsessed and we spend way more time than most people would spend on these ideas. But I do have this secret, which is that I'm really good at improving at things in which I spend a lot of time
Mm.
practicing. And but that's the secret of just about every person. There's really nobody who, if they practice in the right way or practice with some guidance, I think it always helps to have somebody
Mm.
guide you. And I had a very generous editor named Will Schwalbe, who's also a
Mm.
writer. He wrote a beautiful book, among others, but I think his most famous book is The End of Your Life Book Club, and it was about a book club he had started with his mom when she was diagnosed with cancer, and it's just a beautiful book. And so he was able to. I got a master's level education in writing from him, and which I'm forever grateful for. And it was learning by doing, but he told me the right things to read, and he and we had the right discussions about what to include and what to add, and it was just
Amazing.
I'm so grateful for that.
Gary Gulman, thank you so much for joining us on Shop Talk with Writers.
It was my pleasure. You had me with just the name Shop Talk, which is, it's actually the name of a Philip Roth book, Shop Talk.
It is
Yeah, and
literally stolen from Philip Roth, officially stolen,
oh, good for you.
because this
Good
is
for
what this
you.
is. This was Shop Talk with Writers, our last episode of 2025. Gary Gulman's memoir Misfit is published by Flatiron Books. Check out his latest show Grandiloquent, which will make you laugh a lot and probably cry too. We hope you've been enjoying this year's podcast journey with us. You can always revisit our conversations with so many wonderful authors: Colm Toybeen, Ben Markovitz, Caroline O'Donoghue, Tessa Hadley, Sarah Moss, Andre Assiman, John Banville, Anne Morgan, Chigozie Obioma, and many more. We have exciting podcasts coming up in 2026 with Moira Buffini, Frances Bufford, Margaret Busby, Julian Borger, Eden Mackenzie Goddard, Lucy Caldwell, and many more. We are deeply grateful to all our listeners. Your numbers keep growing. From the small team behind this podcast, we wish you a happy, creative, and exciting new year. I'm Elena Lappin. Thank you for listening.